Hey guys, it's Courtney and I'm here with a quick fall card using some Honeybee stamp sets, and we will also be announcing our winner for the $25 gift card to Simon Says Stamp. I'm starting off with the Bushel and a Peck stamp set by Honeybee, and I'm going to be stamping on a piece of Canson watercolor paper, and I'm using Simon Says Stamp Intense Black ink. This is waterproof as well as Copics safe, and we're going to be doing both with this card. So I'm just using the leaf stamps that are part of this set, and I'm just going around the edges. So I'm going to be creating a border here, and I'm starting off with one and kind of just spacing that around the edge of my card panel, and I have a little scrap piece of Eclipse masking paper off to the side, and I'll be using that just to mask off some of the leaves to fill in any gaps that I have. Now this card panel is cut larger than an A2 size card because I know I'll be taping it down in order to do my background, and I don't want it to warp, so that will give me room to still cut it down. That's why I'm not too worried about the stems. Most of those will be cut off. For the masks, I'm just doing a very quick cut here. I'm not worried about it being perfect. You won't see if it's not perfect because of the background that we're creating. And I'm just placing these down as I go, filling in any empty gaps here and just moving the same masks. I only cut one mask for each of the leaves. Now, once I had all of my stamping done, this looks like a complete mess. It won't be. Once we add our color in the background, it will come together. So don't worry about it now. Just keep going. It will look messy before it looks good. I went ahead and taped down my card panel to a board. I just use an old clipboard here. And I am using candied apple, fossilized amber, wild honey, and frayed burlap, all distress oxides. I have my Ranger craft mat there off to the side, and I'm just smushing my ink pads down. Now the candied apple I was a little bit worried about using because this is a pretty bright red, but I ended up really loving it, so I ended up adding more than maybe what I intended on. I am using a number 8 brush by the Silver Brush Company, and I'm just adding clean water all around the edge of my card panel. And then I'll just start dropping in my color. I started with the lightest color, which is the fossilized amber. Then I'll move on to the wild honey. Now, some of these will look dark at first. It will look very dark at first, but just keep in mind that all watercolor does dry back and lighten up as it dries, especially Oxides. I find that these lighten up as they dry more than any other watercolor I've used. Once I started adding the candied apple and it started mixing with the other colors, and you got some oranges there and some areas that remained red, I really liked it. So I ended up taking a little bit more of that and just splattering that with my paintbrush while the paper is still wet. So if you splatter it while the paper is still wet, it will blend with the colors you have down already. So I liked the look of that. To the middle, I did splatter some wild honey, and that obviously is the dry area of the card panel, so that will not blend, but you'll have those little splatters in the background. I just took a dry paper towel and kind of dabbed up some of those puddles that were forming. You may have to go back in and add a little bit of color after you do this because this will take up some of the color. Once that was dry, I removed that from my board, and we'll start with the Copic coloring now. You can see that it definitely did dry back by quite a bit. Now I'm going right in with my darkest colors here. Because we already have a base color down with the Oxides, I'm not worried about starting with my lightest color. I will not show you all of these leaves. It took a little bit of time, but I'm just doing some basic coloring here. I'm not being too careful. And I tried to stick with the leaves that had the most of the color that I was working with. So these are my darker oranges. So I tried to stick with the leaves that were mostly orange to begin with because of the oxides. And then I'll blend that out with my mid-tone color and then go to my lightest and just kind of flick that out to not all the way to the end. I want some of that oxide to still remain. Next, we'll move on to the yellow combination. Now, I use a YR marker as well as Y markers. I know I've said this in the past, but they blend beautifully together. They're almost interchangeable. And again, I just tried to stick with some of the leaves that had a lot of yellow in them to begin with, starting with that darkest color, blending out with that mid-tone, and then back to, or not back to, but to my lightest color. Now for the reds, they are pretty dark. In fact, my darkest color is called dark red. Again, trying to stick with some of those leaves that already have some of that red in it. I wish I would have added a little bit more of that candied apple, but I ended up getting my red back with the Copics. I stuck to the colors that, like I said, the leaves are already mostly that color anyway. And then once I had all of those done, I filled in any of the ones that were kind of all three colors combined, trying not to put two reds next to each other or two oranges next to each other. The yellows and the oranges are pretty similar, but once they are next to each other, you can definitely tell the difference. Once all of my coloring was done, I went ahead and trimmed down my card panel. And I took a little bit off of both sides as well as the top and the bottom, just so that those leaves would still be centered. I'm pretty much just kind of cutting off the stems. For my sentiment, I will bring out another Honeybee stamp set. This is Happy Fall, y'all. And I'm just using the sentiment from this set. And I'm going to bring out my Misty here because the watercolor paper is textured. I knew I'd probably have to stamp this twice. So I went ahead and lined up my sentiment right there in the center in that white space. And I'll be stamping with VersaFine Onyx Black ink. This is kind of my go-to ink for sentiments. It gives you a very bold black sentiment. And I did end up stamping this twice. Now this is also a pigment ink, so you'll want to make sure that you put your card panel aside for just a minute or two. It dries quick in comparison to most pigment inks, but it is not immediate. So just be careful that you don't smear that. Once I had the sentiment done, I took a piece of Fun Foam, which I've been using a lot lately. And this is cut just smaller, just slightly smaller than the card panel itself. I adhered that flat to the card panel and used Tombow Mono multi glue to adhere the panel to an A2 size side folding card base. Now, Tombow Mono multi glue dries pretty quick when it's paper to paper, but with the Fun Foam, it doesn't. So it gives you a lot of time to position it the way you want it. But I'll either put it under something heavy or just leave my hand on it just to make sure that it does fully adhere to the card panel. I added a few Nuvo jewel drops just around the sentiment. And these weren't actually noticeable in the end because of those splatters that we created. But that is it for the card. Now for the giveaway for the gift card to Simon Says Stamp, I use a random generator that picked Amy Scarborough. So Amy, if you could just email me, that way I can email you your prize. Thank you so much, guys, and have a great day.